Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our panel on scaling brand safe UGC with Kendo brands and Aura frames. We have some great panelists here today, and we'll go through all the intros in a minute. But I'm just going to give everybody a few moments to kind of trickle into the room. Wait for some last minute stragglers. Is anyone here for a second time or first panels? Anyone tuned into one of our webinars before?
In the audience, right?
Crickets in the chat right now. Maybe you can tell us where you're tuning in from. Hello. Glasgow, cool. Awesome. There are a few more minutes. South Carolina, very nice. I'm tuning in from Florida at the moment. Arizona, nice. All over the place. Okay, well, I'm going to pop up a few polls just to kind of get a gauge for kind of where everyone's at with influencer marketing and brand safety. So first question, have you ever had to pull content for brand safety reasons? Go ahead and select the one that resonates the most. Yes, more than once. Oh, we have one not yet, but always a concern.
Ooh.
Yes, more than once for somebody. No, never been an issue. Okay, so far pretty even split across the board. It's interesting. So we'll definitely go over that a bit. And then the second question, how do you currently handle brand safety and creator content? Do you have a formal review process? Maybe you trust creators and only review if needed. Inconsistent, depends on the team or the campaign, or don't have a system in place yet. Okay, formal review process, no system in place, inconsistent. All right, so far seems like majority of people are saying they don't have a system in place yet. I know that as you start to scale influencer content, that can start to be a struggle. So we'll definitely dive into how to get a good system in place as you scale your influencer content. All right, well, I am going to pass the baton over to Chris to take things away.
Fantastic. Hello, everybody. I'm Chris Raniere. I'm CRO of Statusphere. We're here to help brands scale micro-influencer marketing efficiently and safely. We actually use AI for our brand safety. Brand safety will evolve in today's landscape. It's about ensuring alignment, authenticity, and trust, especially when activating thousands of micro-influencers. Today, I'm joined by three experts who bring unique perspectives to the discussion. I do have a slide. I was supposed to go to a slideshow, but we're not going to do that. We're going to skip right into it because I really want to get to this discussion. So let's meet our contestants. Can I ask each one of you to introduce yourself and give us a little background on your company? Heidi, I'll start with you if you want to kick us off.
Sure. My name is Heidi Sanders. I'm the digital design director at Kendo Brands. We're a brand incubator for skincare, beauty, and our brands are Fenty Beauty. We have a multiple portfolio of brands within Fenty Beauty, Ulla Henriksen Skincare, Lip Lab, and KVD Vegan Beauty.
Fabulous. Thank you for joining us, Heidi. Excited.
Thank you for having me.
You ready to give us a little intro?
Yeah, definitely. Hi, everyone. My name is Mueller. I'm the paid social manager over at Aura Frames. Here at Aura, we specialize in digital picture frames. So if you're not as familiar with us, you might, see those on your friends or your family's houses. We really specialize in bringing families and loved ones together by sharing unlimited photos and videos. So again, if anyone needs a last minute Father's Day gift, you know where to go. But really excited to talk about how we really incorporate brand safety and UGC into our paid strategy specifically today.
Yeah, I'll give a plug for Aura Frames. When they started working with us, everybody, one person tried it and then told the other person. I think half our company owns Aura Frames now.
That's how it goes. I will say.
They're
That's how it
so
works.
cool. So
Yeah.
go check it out. I guarantee you'll buy one. It's addictive. All right, and Dr. Tamara, just a little intro.
Hi guys, I'm Dr. Tamara Zubatiy. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Barometer. Barometer is the premier brand suitability and contextual targeting solution that uses AI to provide a deeper contextual perspective. Our focuses are on podcast, micro influencers, and other kind of niche emerging channels, including gaming and in-app brand suitability.
Thank you, Doctor. Just a little extra information. So Barometer and Statusphere are actually working together. Dr. Tamara's technology is one of its kind, similar to what Statusphere is. And we're using her technology. We deliver brand safety now using our AI, but we'll get to it. There's different levels that brands seem to like. And so with Barometer, we're going to be able to allow brands to customize how strict or non-strict they are with brand safety. So we're really excited. It's a whole different webinar. We'll get to it once it's just into production, but really great to have you here, Doctor. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's start with something simple, because I think this actually is not simple. Defining brand safe UGC. What is it? Let's start by understanding what do people actually think the brand safety means. So Heidi, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you. What does brand safe UGC mean to you? And has that definition changed over time?
Yeah, brand safe UGC means to me that, creators are telling my brand story, but in their unique voice. Since my brands are all within the beauty space, I'm looking for creators who are, beauty, fashion, lifestyle, and with a feed free of, anything that could be interpreted as controversial behavior. And creators who naturally have their own aesthetic and brand. But I think that, they should be able to own the message that I've given them in their brief, and creatively adapt it to fit seamlessly within their feed without dilution.
And so your major concern, it's brand safe, more about the creator's feed and the content around your content?
Yes.
Is that fair to say? Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, that's fantastic. Cindy. Aura Frames has engaged with various influencer segments. How do you define brand safe UGC?
Yeah, I think making sure that the creator is authentic to who you are as a brand and who they are as a creator, not only in their brand ads, maybe sponsored ads, but also in their organic content. Here at Aura, we really value that our customers trust us with their most important and valued moments, with their friends and family. It's not something that's just like willy-nilly on their wall. And we really want to make sure that we're engaging with influencers that share that same sentiment. If they're not, we're probably not going to work with them, but making sure that we communicate who Aura, what our Aura's values are, who our audience is, why it's important for us to have the brand saved, and like a very specific, I would say, curated type of content, just to make sure that we are engaging with influencers that like exude the same type of like trust and authenticity that we feel like that we do as a brand.
And as you've been working with creators for a while now, have you seen that definition from the corporate level change? Has it gotten more strict, or people starting to loosen up a little bit?
I think that it's gotten looser to the extent that we want people to have their own creative spin on it. We don't want people to be like robots with their content and just have the same UGC content over and over again. We want people to put their own flair on it, but we definitely don't want to stray from, like, I would say, the type of videos that they might be sharing with their loved ones, and like showing that the really core family moments and friend moments, parent-child, having grandparents in the content, having the best memories that everyone loves to share. We still want to make sure that's core to the brand, so we haven't really strayed on that front, but opening up the creativity to show, like, to let people decide how they want to showcase it in their UGC.
Awesome. Yeah, it definitely has changed. I see it change kind of every week depending on what client we're talking with. Tamara, I'll come to you one more in a second, but I have another question here for Heidi. From the creative side, would you consider this to be kind of disruptive? It's like a disrupting of what brand marketing used to be. Would you agree with that? And how do you, like, I did not, so we're good with there. So, so I think disruption is a big word, especially in the internet. But yeah, could you talk a little bit about how you view it kind of as disruptive of what used to be brand safe in 1990 versus now?
Yeah, I mean, I would take, Fenty Beauty, for example. Everything is so dialed. It's, the brand is so well done, and everything's, perfectly fits within the brand. And then once we start introducing, especially micro influencers, it's really taking it outside of a comfort zone, I think, for the brand.
Right.
And one thing I'm noticing now is engagement, right? People are really engaging with this content. And even though it might not be, it's not campaign level, it's what we like to call lo-fi. But we're seeing engagement. We're putting it on our product pages. It's in our, you go into our product page, you can see all of that influencer content. Right below the buy button, and even in the carousel, it's infused in some of our email marketing. So it's really becoming part of the weave of the brand, even though it's not always on brand.
Yeah, I find it just fascinating. I'm super happy to be able to watch this change, but it's gone. You've kind of got to have you got to be comfortable with your brand being different brands depending on the audience.
Yeah.
But the cool thing is you get to meet so many more audiences than you would if you kept it within a little box, right? So,
absolutely.
Yeah, really cool time, right? So, Tamara, you work with some of the top brands in the country, actually maybe all of them. What it seems to be consistent among all the brands and how they define UGC?
So I will backtrack a tiny bit in how they would and explain kind of what I've seen in terms of how folks look at brand safety versus brand suitability, and then how that applies in UGC. Historically, most of our clients are like Fortune 500 brands that have limitations, sometimes legal restrictions on where they can and can't advertise. And so their restrictions aren't applicable to everybody's experience, but it's interesting to learn from them and see how they're able to kind of adapt given all of the cool availability of UGC and kind of the change away from the traditional marketing practices. So in terms of how folks are thinking about brand safety is typically thought of as like a binary property of the content, kind of irrespective of the brand itself. And I'm only saying technically because this like doctor hat on and like we're the brand safety company, but there was an organization that kind of set the difference between what's called like the brand safety floor and then the brand suitability framework, which is above the floor. So literally the brand safety floor it was created because of an ISIS video on YouTube that was like a terrorism recruitment video. This was by no means a micro influencer. This was not somebody that would ever be included in the Statusphere platform. And in this case, basically a L'Oreal ad actually ran on the ISIS video, and YouTube rev shared the revenue with ISIS. And like, this was a huge problem. This literally kind of created the whole cottage industry of brand safety third-party vendors. And what was learned in that moment was that initial recruitment video, that was not brand safe. That's illegal content. That's incitement. Other examples of non-brand safe illegal content include like CSAM, child sexual explicit materials, people trying to sell you drugs or illegal guns. Like, there are things that don't really happen, and they certainly wouldn't happen from like micro influencers that are generally responsible for creating their content to be in service of marketing. However, that is like a whole problem. And so that's the initial kind of fear source for many brands when it comes to UGC. And that type of thing only really can happen if you're buying like directly on the platforms outside of a separate organization like Statusphere, which creates so many different levels of protection for you so that you never really have to deal with that. And that brings us to the much more fun and interesting world of brand suitability. Brand suitability is not a binary property of the content. It is a relationship between the brand standards and values and the content and what's in the content. And so that's really where UGC gets to shine and where Barometer likes to play. We really focus on the space of brand suitability. Not all of the content that we look at is brand safe. very few exceptions. And in the world of brand suitability, this is where you could get really granular. What's suitable for one brand, even one campaign, might not be suitable for another. You can control things like how much profanity am I comfortable with, depending on how old of an audience I'm going after. You can control really everything, even things like different exceptions. Like I'm okay if the creator is like funny, then I'm okay with them using certain jokes or talking about profanity or adult content. So it really allows you to be a lot more granular with your preferences instead of just saying like, oh no, this content doesn't fit because it's illegal. It's more like, this content is the ideal place for my brand, and it perfectly matches the combination of my brand values and my brand standards. So that's largely how we see people kind of define brand safety versus brand suitability, where brand safety, like everything that's not safe, is always blocked, whereas brand suitability is often defined on a spectrum in relationship to the brand standards in a very nuanced way by each kind of brand suitability category.
Yeah, very interesting. Brand suitability. I'm going to start using that more often. So the commonality from your perspective, Tamara, is the illegal stuff. Like that's the commonality. And then once you get above that floor, it kind of wavers this way and that way. And that's exactly what we've seen at Statusphere. Some people are, the bigger brands, like can't even, don't even use TikTok's music library. That's not even it. They want to go more into their own little library, right? Okay, so that's great. So we got a definition, which pretty much says everything that's illegal, everyone agrees with. Kind of above that, it kind of depends on who your brand and how comfortable your brand marketing team is willing to be. So now let's delve into the process of vetting and monitoring influencers to actually mitigate the risk. So now we've got our influencers. What are we doing? Or maybe we haven't got it. We know we're going to use them. How are we deciding what influencers to use? Cindy, how do you vet micro-influencers and UGC for brand?
So I would say the great thing about social media is that the content is there for everyone to consume at any hour of the day, good or bad. You know, we can all fall down the rabbit hole at some point. But with that, I think it's really helpful to go through the pages of the influencers themselves. You know, definitely look at their quantitative metrics, look at their conversion rates, look at their account engagement, look at their past brand partnerships, but also actually go in and vet them on all platforms, not just the one that you're advertising on. So if you're running on TikTok, great, look, deep dive through their TikTok, but also look at their Instagram, their Facebook, their YouTube channels if they have one, to make sure that there aren't any concerns from any aspect of social. And then, you know, since these people are more or less strangers, making sure that their content hits all of the talking points of the brief that we're providing them, if we do get to the point of providing with the brief, while still allowing them to have room for their creativity. Again, it can turn into a little bit of a rabbit hole sometimes, but I think that's the really great world of micro influencers at the same time, because you have the possibilities are endless. If you don't like one of them, you're going to find someone that, you know, work for your brand and that can fit if someone isn't as suitable.
Awesome. And so did I hear that right? So if you're going to, let me see if I did understand you right. If you're going to use an influencer on Instagram, you look at their Instagram feed, but you also look if they have a TikTok, if they have a YouTube feed, even though you're not going to use that content.
Correct. And because I think people, if they're seeing someone else and are following them, they can be exposed to them on any platform, and your brand can be associated with them on any platform. So it's not just their page, but also the content they're promoting, making sure that the brand partnerships that they may have existing match kind of Aura's audience or match who Aura thinks of as their brand. And then also making sure when we do eventually, I would say, get content from them, having multiple pairs of eyes on them. So content might look okay to me, and I might be like, oh, great, like let's go promote this in paid. But that's just from one perspective. Someone else on my team might have a completely different background, completely different perspective, and notice something that I don't. So I think it's just having a team behind it, you know, more than one person to mitigate any risk in that aspect, but also just taking the time, like making the dedicated time to go through it, not just on the surface level.
Or automate it through us.
Or automate it, yeah.
Because that's a lot of work.
I will say a lot less work for the one person.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Heidi, from the creative side, how do you balance visual consistency with creator freedom, the authenticity? Like, how do you hit that balance?
Yeah, I mean, I think really what makes, influencer marketing successful is like that casual conversation that you're having with a friend that doesn't feel like an obvious ad. And, as a brand and briefers, we really need to set that stage for brand safety in terms of what message we want to get across and what we want to avoid. But really at the same time, allow enough breathing room for the influencer to infuse their own personality and creativity so that it does remain authentic. I feel that aesthetically, we provide guidelines, for example, like film in a clutter-free room with good lighting, and we're suggesting clothing that's free from brand logos. But really outside of that, we're holding space for the creator to do what's on brand for them. And personally, I don't feel strongly that the creator or their content needs to feel exactly on brand. My goal is truly to receive a genuine post that feels authentic and is infused with messaging, that are key messaging. And so really authenticity sells itself, honestly.
Okay, so you're the dream creative marketer for influencer marketing software people. You've made that leap into the new world of being disruptive, and so it's kind of the brief. Here's the key things you can't do or you can do, and everything else we're happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, I think you get really interesting content sometimes. I mean, sometimes it's not all going to be good, right? It's going to kind of vary. But I mean, I think it leaves a lot of room for them to really bring, their all and their A game to it. And when they do, you'd be surprised at some of the content that you get.
Yeah, it's amazing. Very cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Tamara, how about we kind of asked the same question as before, but when you get into your suitability, what's the variation of restrictions you've seen? Like wide open to shut it all the way down to this floor? Like how would you answer that question?
That's such a great question. And I feel like the most exciting part of this is that it changes, and it can change even within a quarter, within a campaign. Typically when brands start, the temptation is to be as restrictive as possible. Again, these are mostly like large brands who are less concerned about reaching the audience. Like maybe brand safety is a higher KPI even than performance, which is kind of wild. But historically, people start with like low risk for everything. And we have never had a single brand who hasn't expanded their tolerance after starting to get the monitoring reports. The most common experience is, again, in the podcast space, right? Like we've been buying the show for years, and then it comes back as a flag in the monitoring that they're talking about all the stuff. And they're like, man, like we really got to make sure that show's on the plan. How do we accommodate our standards to better represent that? And then that allows them to widen it out even more. But to give you another example, like there's also tremendous variation by vertical. Financial services brands tend to be pretty like static, honestly, in their standards. There's very little room for wiggle room. However, other brands, we've seen them create like unique brand suitability profiles depending on the audience that they're trying to reach with the campaign. So if they're reaching a younger audience, they might be more tolerant. And I really see a future in like audience suitability. Like how do you walk that line between brand suitability and audience suitability to make sure that you're not blocking your whole audience while you're trying to enforce your brand standards? That would totally defeat the point. We definitely see a lot of changes.
Wow. So that's funny. People have been in unbrand safe environments potentially for a long time. They just didn't know it. Yeah, really.
Brand suitable. And I think, honestly, I wouldn't even say that. I would say that they just, it's hard to really like just off the cuff read off your brand suitability standards unless they're like top down dictated to you by legal. So if that's not the case, it can be hard. Like that's one of the biggest challenges is like, how do you get apples to apples information about all of the kind of content in the universe if you're just one person and you have a subjective perspective? And so part of what we can help with is like maybe it's like low risk, but in Barometer world, we identify it as medium risk. Well, that's okay as long as you can calibrate your expectations to the way that we're measuring stuff. And then once we're aligned there, then the world's your oyster, and you can broaden out and kind of use us to help automate how you would enforce your brand standards.
Got it. So that's actually, I'm going to stay with you, Tamara. I'm going to move to our next section, which is it's not a perfect world. Things go wrong. What happens? I'd love, from your experience, Tamara, what's the process you've seen brands take to get better and not make things go wrong once they've gone wrong?
Yeah, I'll share an example I'm allowed to share from a brand that we have a public case study with, Rocket Money, a wonderful direct-to-consumer brand. And basically they ran a podcast episode on a really controversial guest. This person is like a known misogynist. And so basically their process was previously manually listening to content. They were running on too many shows. They couldn't keep up with manually listening to all the episodes, and this slipped through the cracks. We usually, unfortunately, get the call when something goes wrong. And so they previously weren't working with Barometer, but now they were like, we need a solution. Otherwise, we have to pull the entire channel, and it's our most productive channel. So their team was like, what do you notice about the content that this bad violation kind of had? And one of the things that they noticed was that the host was saying the C word, the derogatory term, and they hadn't previously said that word. And so what they did was they basically defined their brand standards, and they used Barometer to essentially monitor all of the shows that were on their inclusion list and in their consideration set for when the host would start to use the C word. And if that happened, they would immediately pull anything that was scheduled. And they managed to avoid 2 placements with an Andrew Tate guest. Or a sympathizer guest because of this strategy. And so that was just one example of how they defined a really custom rule. It's not like they were setting everything to low. Like they had a really specific thing that they were trying to avoid, and they were able to operationalize that strategy, activate it, and then avoid the negative placements in the future without cutting the channel.
Wow, really interesting. So excited to get your technology with ours. Sydney, when it comes to brand safety with Aura, what have you learned about how to set clear expectations up front?
Yeah, the more detail, the better. And also do not assume that anything is implicitly understood. Just all the assumptions out the window. I think one of the things that I've learned, and honestly using Statusphere as technology, is putting the do's in a brief are just as important as putting the don'ts. So that way, when we're getting the content, there's no question of what our influencers should or should not be doing. I love more detail the better. I think it still leaves room for their creativity to come into play and their authenticity to come out in their videos. But again, you want to make sure that their values are in line with the brand that you're promoting. And when there's, I think, too much room for interpretation, that's when a lot more brand safety or brand suitability concerns come up, and there could be a lot more, even before it goes live or goes into paid, could be a lot more back and forth on the back end, which can delay campaigns, delay launches, and you never want to be up against the gun against something that could have been figured out 2 weeks prior.
Yeah, and you've used Statusphere, and we've also found that once you get past about 750 characters with the micro influencer, like you can't, it kind of goes out the window, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think our system is that's the only frustrating part about our system, but it works, right?
Yeah. No, it made me learn to be a lot more concise, I think, in my brief writing as well, because I figured out what was most and least important, I would say, from like our brand suitability areas, and also just, again, figuring out what we don't want in our videos was really, really key to figuring out what led to our success.
Amazing. Yeah, the don'ts are very important. Great. And Heidi, so you're on the creative side, you're frontline, you are Miss Proactive. What's the must-haves when you're putting a brief, or when your team's putting a brief together?
Yeah. I think really working with micro-influencers can be a little bit challenging sometimes. And I've had a lot of learnings over time where I need to be really prescriptive and give direction. And then, where it's better to be, like I was saying before, hands off. And as a creative myself, it's hard not to provide aesthetic direction, but I try to include key moments, like, for instance, somebody, a close-up of a before and after, if it's a complexion product or a skincare product, if we want to show like visual improvements. Believe it or not, I've received content that was filmed like really far away. And so for me, that was a surprise and a learning that, you know, I need to be prescriptive about telling someone that if I want to show a complexion or a skincare product, like it needs to be filmed really up close. So that would be in my do's category. I think my biggest piece of advice would be really nailing that brief again. Like Cindy was saying, like it needs to be concise. We talked about the 700 characters. I think you need to, you know, maybe you're not hitting every point in your marketing deck, but you're really distilling it. And I think it's easier to interpret and create content around if it's simple.
Yeah.
And then lastly, a big learning for me was if your brand's pronunciation isn't obvious, making sure that you're really providing phonetics or even, you know, a link to somewhere where somebody is saying it correctly. One of the examples is Ulla Henriksen. We've gotten everything from Ol to Ul, all kinds of things. Hendrickson instead of Henriksen. So, you know, and there's nothing worse than getting a piece of content with the brand name that's completely off mark. So really making sure that we are being very prescriptive about how people say the brand name.
Awesome. Yeah, it's sometimes frustrating, sometimes funny.
We made a whole social post about all the names that Ulla is,
Right.
Olay, all kinds of things.
Okay, fantastic. So let's talk about when things go wrong. Let's get into the future, and then we'll have some time for questions if we have any. I'm going to go around the table on this first question because I think each one's going to be a little different. Tamara, let's start with you. How do you see brand safety evolving within the micro-influencer marketing space? I mean, we've already broken tons of old rules, but how do you see it evolving over the next 5-10 years?
I really see the future as like custom and more specific, getting away from standard taxonomies like GARM or the IAB Content Taxonomy 3.0 to be a lot more hyper-focused on what brands are uniquely caring about. So, for example, it might be not brand suitable for them to mispronounce the name of your brand. And that would be like a really hyper-specific example that maybe is definitely not covered by a standard taxonomy. Other examples are like, say you're promoting like a weight loss product. Your specific brand suitability KPI might be avoiding discussions of GLP-1s or GLP-1 agonists. Or maybe it's just avoiding negative discussions of those. It can get really, really fun and specific. And the great beauty and advantage of that is that as nuanced as you can get, that's how much you're able to increase your reach, because you'll be blocking less content that doesn't actually violate your standards and instead really narrowing in on the positive reframe of brand suitability, which is where's the optimal place for my ad to go, rather than what are the scary things that I'm trying to avoid. So I think that's the shift that I'm really excited about. And then I think one other parallel shift that we're seeing that kind of relates to that is there's really a focus right now on premium inventory. And I think there's like a huge difference between buying a micro influencer campaign compared to just buying an ad campaign on the social platform directly. There's a variety of reasons for that difference. One of them is, of course, this much tighter level of curation, brand suitability, enforcement that you're able to get. But another reason is that like on the platforms in general, they're more subject to like the standard industry rules, including like the IAB's adjacency rules for social media, which are like one post. So it could be like illegal content, one post, your ad, illegal content, one post. That's not great. And so I think that you're able to get a lot finer control when you take it in-house, like you're doing here with Statusphere, and approaching it from the micro-influencer perspective rather than leveraging some of those larger platforms. So I do expect to see more of that with AI tools, making it more possible for brands to manage that themselves. And with platforms like Statusphere, rather than having to rely on the first-party tools of walled gardens.
Awesome. Very interesting. Sydney, how about you?
Yeah, I think there are going to be shifts, not only in the content, but also the platforms that we're advertising on. I think this was a big conversation when the TikTok ban was more imminent. Everyone was asking the question of what's next? What's going to replace TikTok? Are people going to Instagram? Are they going to Facebook? Are they going to YouTube? Or are they going to somewhere completely new? And I read a lot of articles. No one really had an answer to that question at the end of the day. And TikTok's still here, and I don't know if it's going anywhere for the foreseeable future. But I think people, and we at Aura, are keeping a really close eye on what social platform is next and what brand safety and suitability will look like on that platform, because content performs differently in every platform, but also there's different audiences on all those. So, Threads is opening the market for video ads soon. What are video ads going to look like on Threads compared to Instagram or TikTok? What are the brand safety implications on all these new platforms where, it could be a brand new audience compared to what's on social media right now?
Very interesting. Yeah, just a side real quick. TikTok I'm going to show my age here, but TikTok reminds me of the rock band Who, and their final tour. I think they had their first final tour when I was in grade school, and their last final tour when I was in college. Like, what spanned 20 years of final tours. And Heidi, how do you see it evolving from your standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I think it used to be that, these large creators and celebrities had that share of voice and influencing, and they came off a little bit less authentic and read more like an ad. TikTok is now, speaking of TikTok, has really changed the game as it came to influencing. It feels less produced. It feels like it's opening doors for the micros, similar to what we saw sort of in that early influencer day, YouTube influencer day. And, the varied cultures and languages and ages within those micro networks really, widen your net as a marketer. And, for instance, you're talking about like a brand that has, and has a creator that maybe is in their 20s and a creator that's in their 40s and 60s and so on. They're speaking about the same product, but they're speaking about it very differently in a way that relates to their individual followers and their particular skin challenges. So I think that is really, really interesting. It's sort of bringing back like what I did see in those early YouTube days. And I also think, there's less risk involved in that micro influencer network. There was sort of like, the big creators, there was the one shot. And it leaves more room for experimentation for us. And now, social selling is also sort of woven into this as well. And so we're seeing that shift from, likes and shares and all of that you would typically see within sort of more of the organic side to metrics that are more of a ROI, because you're talking about direct selling within a platform. And so I think that's really changing the game.
Yeah, I agree. Micro-influencing alone has been a disruptor, and now the affiliate world is about to get turned upside down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And all the old affiliate platforms, I've never heard anybody that uses one now that says, I love this thing. Right? They were built, not their fault, built for a completely different model, right? And I've watched, like some of them try to integrate with CreatorIQ or us or something, and that's just it's a Band-Aid that doesn't even cover the whole wound, right? It's brutal. It's brutal. Heidi, actually, I wanted to ask you something, because we were talking earlier, it's not really the same topic, but I just remembered it. We were talking about how UGC or lo-fi content is pretty much, it's on brand when it's in the scrolling environment. So you're used to it being a little loose and authentic, right? Mm-hmm. But when it goes outside of the scrolling, I'm curious what you're feeling about and how is it going to evolve? Because a lot of our customers, that's one of the main reasons they run on our software, is to take that UGC and put it in a newsletter, as you were saying, in e-commerce. And like, how do you get comfortable with that? Or do you get comfortable with that?
I think you just need to get comfortable with the uncomfortable, really. No, like I was saying before, the engagement is so, we can put out campaign video that is extremely produced and really high quality and all of that. And then we're seeing engagement with the influencer, not with the highly produced content. And so it's telling you right there that that's what the people want to see more of. And so I think now brands are really kind of meshing that together, especially, you know, on their sites, within their email, SMS, all of that. It's sort of becoming part of, like I was saying, the fabric of the brand, even though it's, you know, not perfect on brand. It's still, you know, I think that authenticity is, like I was talking about earlier, I think that authenticity is really where it's at and what people are relating to. Whereas, you know, maybe a model who is absolutely gorgeous, they're like, well, what's it going to look like on me? You know, what's it going to do for me? And so I think that that's really where that shift is happening.
Got it. And then, so one follow-on question. Would you say that the UGC that you repurpose falls more into what you would expect art directed to look like? Or, okay, so tell me, what are those pieces?
No, I mean, if we were filming a piece of content for our own brand, it would have brand colors in the background, probably, you know, depending on what it was being used for, a logo or some sort of wardrobing that felt on brand. But I think when you know, open that up to an influencer space, like, it's going to be their own vibe. Right. And so, but I think there's a level of forgiveness. Like, the consumer's not really, they're kind of seeing it all together, and it's all part of the story, the brand story. And it's just that person is telling it in a different way. And maybe they're not wearing brand. I think it'd be weird to have an influencer branded, you know, it's not really. So people are just used to seeing it now, and they're getting even more used to seeing it now that there's so much infuser, and you know, it's really infused into your marketing now. Like, I even think about like TikTok lives, you know, we're bringing those influencers into our live selling environment, things like that. And so again, really that it's just really weaving it all into your brand.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you. Cindy, this is all script, so apology, but Heidi just brought something up. So to Heidi's point, do you see brand now more about the story of the brand versus the font has to be like this, it has to be this shade of blue and this type of font?
Yeah, I think especially on social, people get bored really easily if they're seeing the same content over and over again. And I think when people see that, they think it's more scripted, which, you know, it probably is to some extent. And they lose a little bit of trust in the content that they're watching because they don't think that it's a quote unquote real opinion or a real value, or when influencers try to pass off an ad as not an ad, you know, and then people find out it's an ad and get really angry. It's really about cultivating trust with your audience, no matter how big or small it is. And I think when it's a little too scripted, people are very turned off at that, especially now. I think, you know, at the onset of influencers, it's a little different. That's like the only type of content we were seeing. But now that content's getting a little old, and people are really craving some originality and like sparks. And I think, Heidi, like you were saying, TikTok has changed the game where the most random piece of content can go viral and people will fall in love with it. So it's just that originality, I think, has much higher payoff than it did 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to watch. So fascinating to watch. Tamara, could you just give us a little bit more? I know you already answered this question, but a little bit more, like the different brands you work with, how have you seen them evolve? And you've got some people who've been using your platform for a year or two. Like, how have you seen them evolve in what they consider UGC safe?
I think that the biggest changes that I've seen are really that like hyper specialization and getting away from having like a single blanket policy to really fine tuning the specific standards to the messaging that they're going to deliver with that campaign. And so let me think about a couple of examples. I really think that some of the best examples come from like telecom brands, because their audience is like everybody. And so it can be really tempting to place pretty strong restrictions because it's a regulated industry. But what they've been able to do is separate out their like consumer lines from their business lines. And then for the consumer lines, be a lot less restrictive. Another thing that I've seen work really well is having this kind of a pre-curated network of approved influencers. And so there's a great deal of vetting that can be done in that initial kind of process of onboarding or approving an influencer, right? As Sydney was saying, you can go back and look at all of their other channels, and that might be like really time consuming. With Barometer, you can just like rip all of their previous posts and like quickly analyze them and make sure that they've never said anything hateful or anything racist or anything that has violated your standards. That's like a great first step, and that builds an initial layer of confidence with that creator that might allow you to be more tolerant with them over time when your campaign is actually live. So I think that that combination of that pre-screen to make sure that somebody's included in your curation, I think curation is like a great word. So curation, and then later that allows you to be a lot more flexible because you've developed trust with that creator based on a detailed data-driven understanding of everything that they've ever posted online. So like probabilistically, they're probably not going to go off the rails after you've vetted them. And then of course, that ability to do monitoring in real time or in near real time, instead of just leading with blocking, that's also been a tremendous tool for folks because it's allowed them to have that experience of like, oh, I would have blocked this totally great piece of content. So glad I'm not blocking stuff yet. And instead I'm monitoring and collecting all this data. And then by the time they're ready to set up their brand standard profile for actual targeting, it'll be a lot more calibrated to what they really want, less restrictive and more likely to clear.
Amazing. Next question, Sydney, still in the future. So we've been talking about how everybody should just get more comfortable, like it's not as risky as you sound. Are there any new or emerging risks that you see coming down the pipe that we should worry about?
I think from emerging risks, just being, again, very mindful of the platforms that we're advertising on and that platforms that everyone is posting on. So using a tool like Tamara said that will cover all of your bases. I think that more people are, social media is obviously not going away. Influencer media is not going away, and people are going to be coming out on more platforms than less. So just being very mindful that people aren't just existing in the space that you see them. They're existing out in the world. They're existing, influencers are on every red carpet now. What's their behavior in that? What's their behavior with other brands? How do they interact with their fans if they have fans, which might be a little bit more concern for, nano or larger creators than micro creators, but any moment can be a viral moment, and watching how those people, micro influencers, react with those people on like a day-to-day basis, I think is something that should be kept top of mind for everyone, and not just, on social media in general, but should be just always taken into consideration.
Always. Okay, amazing. One more question, and you kind of just answered your version, Sydney, but maybe I'll ask you again if you want. There's plenty of brands out there. I'm assuming many of them logged into this webinar that know they've got to get there. They're probably they're behind the curve or trying to catch up quick. Heidi, to start with you, like, what advice would you give to the brand that's about to put their toe in the water? What should they do to make sure they see the real value and don't get scared right away because the water's cold?
I work backwards. I think it's very intimidating going into influencer marketing with such a large net that, you get overwhelmed within the first 10 minutes. I think defining what your brand is, what you value, and what brand safety, like we did earlier in this webinar, like what brand safety means for you is a really good first step, because then you can narrow down the pool of influencers you're choosing from. You can see what audiences that you want to target, what audiences that you currently reach with your brand that you might want to keep saturating, or get some new customers. So don't go into it with just let me look at every single influencer out there that's possible. There's probably 1,000 new influencers that have joined the game since we started this call. So it's going to be a little overwhelming. I think if you approach it that way, like you said, but just work backwards, define what your vision is, and then you'll be able to find someone, I think, that fits into your niche.
Yeah, totally. And one point you put out there early, which is start small. We've seen that we actually now recommend highly against it, but with Statusphere, it's very tempting to come in and go, well, you can get me 500 posts in 30 days. Like, let's do it, right? And then the first couple come across like, oh, wait, we didn't mean that. Wasn't introduced. No, that it gets so confusing. So now, like, start with 100 and check it out and see how it goes. Heidi, would you add anything to that? Any advice?
I'm trying to think if there's anything specific. I mean, I think, like we said, we're talking about the vetting process. I mean, I think, gosh, AI has really changed that game completely. And so I think that, you can go in it knowing that there's sort of less risk in that case because, especially Statusphere, Barometer, it's sounding like we can do so much more. But in terms of, the actual campaign, I do agree with starting small. I think it's good to run a couple of things and understand really like where your wins are and your learnings and things like that, and being able to adjust that going into like an SEO campaign or something like that. I think there's a lot of learnings along the way.
Amazing. Tamara, you want to add anything there to advice?
Don't beat yourself up is like a really good piece of starting advice too. Like, you're in amazing hands with the Statusphere team, and everything that you've been doing so far is probably awesome. And it's really exciting that you're here and taking the first step of learning from the best practices of leaders. So yeah, I think that's probably my best advice is don't beat yourself up, and it's never too late to start getting started and building up a strategy. But it's also great to learn from the experiences of others.
Great, fantastic. All right, so we got about 9 minutes left. We got a couple questions. Let's see, anybody can answer a question. Here's a good one. The last one just came in. Do you approach UGC differently for organic versus paid?
I can take that one. So I think with organic, when we first start seeing the posts that come in organically, it's really good to see the organic engagement that comes in and seeing what posts are taking off in the organic network before putting them in paid. I think we are able to see what audiences are responding to and which audiences are responding to what content. Because if you really want to target a certain niche or target a certain demographic before putting everything into paid, focus on maybe the one or two posts that are really taking off within that demographic and putting, the cash behind it instead of spreading yourself a little bit thin and putting cash behind, 20 posts at a time.
Anybody else have anything to add to how you approach UGC differently from organic to paid channels? That's perfect. Oh. Yeah, Heidi?
No, I mean, I work more on the paid side, so not my expertise.
Gotcha. Cool. So I think we had time for one more. So we already answered that one. Father's Day gift. Cindy, we're still selling for you. Unbelievable.
Perfect.
How do you manage approvals without slowing everything down? Is assuming you're not using Statusphere. Anybody? Is everybody just using Statusphere?
I think one of the benefits of having relationships with the micro, and it's also what I think is going to be changing in the long run, when you have an initial relationship with the micro influencer, it's easier. And to what Dr. Tamara was saying before, like, you have that relationship with them, you can trust them, so the approval process might not take as long the third or fourth video or campaign that you're running with the person instead of the first or second. So I think in the beginning, you really don't want to skim on any approval process. You want to take your time, but developing long-term relationships with the micro influencers can save you time in the long run.
Yeah, and that's great advice and small plug since it is our webinar. That's one of the features we recently added, where as you like creators are posting for you, you can tag them within our system and pull them into your own community, which you can run campaigns just with the people that you trust and you've worked with in the past. Fantastic. So here we go. what are your thoughts on having the influencer disclose paid ad or partnership and its effects on maintaining authenticity amongst their followers? Roderick, I'm going to answer your question. Anybody want to take that one? Your thoughts on having an influencer having to disclose paid, basically following FTC rules, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a guideline.
Yeah. But do you think it hurts? Do you think it's hurting? I personally think it's just part of the game, and I think everyone's learned it already. I haven't seen. Yeah, go ahead, Heidi.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think as a, just if you're going through your TikTok or Instagram scroll, like, and you see somebody talking about a product, unless they say, I bought this myself, I kind of assume it came from a shipment from a brand. I'm not, I mean, it is what it is, right? It's like, so I don't think that it's necessarily hurting us. I think if their content is authentic and they're speaking authentically, I honestly, I'm engaged with the content and all of that. I'm not really noticing, it was a paid partnership or anything like that. Now, if they're speaking in a way that feels like they're reading from a card with the brand, the marketing deck, then that's different.
Yeah, that we've seen it over and over again. People come and put in their brief. They must say like this long sentence, and it's the brand name of the product, right? And they never get good engagement.
Mm-hmm.
They never, right? It just kind of falls apart. But rather, as far as following FTC guidelines, Statusphere running hundreds of thousands of collaborations, as long as the brand's not doing the things that this group has said not to do, it has not affected folks. I mean, Aura Frames, I think, is another good one. They've had great success. Great product, I think, is real important too. But using it, and I think also using something like Statusphere, quite honestly, like not seeding to people you think that are in your audience, but having a way for them to see what you're offering and say, raise their hand and go, I love this. I want to use it, which is exactly what happens with us. They're typically already customers or soon become customers.
Mm-hmm.
Heidi decided she had to go.
Sorry. Wi-Fi issues.
One more question and we'll call it a day. I think it's worse if people can tell it's an ad. And let's see. I think it's worse if people can tell it's an ad and then the creator isn't upfront about it being an ad. People want the transparency. That's a valid point, Samantha, very, very, very valid point. Okay, you're welcome, Roderick. All right, no more questions. Give it 20 more seconds for everybody to pop a question in there to our panel. No questions coming through. So I want to really thank Heidi, Sydney, Tamara. This was amazing. I appreciate you giving us an hour of your time. Everybody out there, hope you learned something. And if you have any questions on how to get on the Statusphere's platform, just click that button in the bottom and somebody on my team will talk to you. Perfect. We're going to sign off. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.